What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of The Building Code. I am Charley Birtwistle, and here today we have Estie Briggs, who is an emotional intelligence coach and consultant at Briggs Performance Consulting. We're going to be talking about imposter syndrome. So we've had Estie on before. Last time was talking about regulating emotions, staying calm in the face of adversity, not getting too stressed out and yelling or punching someone, but better ways to deal with that. And during the interview, we talked about imposter syndrome, which got brought up a couple times, and we're like, we just have to have her back on to talk more about this. So that will be what we're covering today. I'm personally very excited because imposter syndrome is something I face constantly, and I think a lot of people do, whether they realize it or not. So we're going to talk about what are some different strategies you can do to overcome that, and also how you can be a better ally in the workplace with other people that may be experiencing imposter syndrome to help them feel more empowered. Estie is also going to bring a very insightful angle of talking about women in construction, and in a very male-dominated field. I think only 11% of the construction workforce is made up of women. That can just compound on the impact of imposter syndrome. When you're looking around, you don't see a ton of people that look like you that are potentially dealing with the same things that you're dealing with. So for the women listening, Estie will have some fantastic advice on how to overcome this, and the men listening will have some fantastic advice on how you can help create a better workplace for women in construction, and make sure that everyone on your team is happy, healthy, and wise, and productive, and you can tackle the world together. That will be my goal to get out of this interview, but I am not going to be the one doing it. Estie will be. So without further ado, let's get her in here. Estie, welcome back to the Building Code. How's it going?
Good to see you again, Charley.
Fantastic to see you again. One of our rare and special recurring guests. So excited to have you back on.
Thank you.
But for those people that did not catch your last episode, as always, we like to start with, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, kind of where you came from and how you got to where you're at today.
Okay, sure. I think this shifts every time, but born and raised in the Bay Area. I now am doing a lot of work with, and especially with construction, actually, of emotional intelligence workshops for a lot of project management, leadership. I do part of the PMCA program for Yukon. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them, but they offer this 13-week program to construction project managers, and we always kick it off with emotional intelligence, and people love it. So that's what I've been working on, like, as of lately. I just did the first one in Anaheim about a week ago. And other than that, I also do a lot of workshops around communication styles, and I'm really passionate about helping people build the skills that we'd all rather be having, know? I think, and I'm always working on it myself.
Awesome.
It's a constant journey.
Yeah, the last episode I remember was about regulating emotions. Obviously, The job site can be super stressful. You're dealing with a ton of different people, a lot of cooks in the kitchen. Clients have very high expectations and short timelines and a lot of money. And you're dealing with subcontractors, the rest of your employees and architects and blah, blah, blah. How do you regulate those emotions, remain calm under stress? And what I loved about the last episode that you're on, well, it was definitely geared towards our listeners, which are largely contractors. I myself was taking a ton of notes because obviously I work in a workplace and I'm stressed, and I have to handle myself professionally in meetings and make sure that everyone gets along. And I just remember as we were talking, we hit on a ton of different subjects that were slightly not outside of what we're supposed to be talking about, which is regulating emotions. And we have to have Estie back on to talk about all these other things that feed into emotional intelligence and making yourself the most productive and happy person you can be, and making sure the people around you are the most productive and happy they can be. And one that stood out, where I remember at the very end, we're like, we have to have you back on to talk an entire episode about this, is imposter syndrome. And I am once again super excited to get the opportunity to be the one interviewing you, because I'm going to take notes, because this is something that I deal with constantly. But for those people that maybe don't know what imposter syndrome is, let's start at the very top. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, I thank you for the super kind intro, and I'm super excited. I love talking about this stuff too, because I am just wired to share information. So every time I learn something, I'm like, how can we turn this into a class? And so imposter syndrome is First of all, I'm just going to say it's not a syndrome. Like after my research, I bristle at calling it syndrome because syndrome implies that it's something that you need to go fix or that you need to get diagnosed. But it's basically a collection of feelings and experiences where you're constantly either, and we all have that, we all have an inner voice, right? Some of us have several, which is okay. It's totally healthy and normal. Your inner voice is always saying things like, why are you at this seat? Why did they leave you in charge of these people? You don't deserve to be here. They're going to find out you're a fraud. And so what happens is it ends up keeping us from moving forward and it keeps us from getting what we want. And, it can manifest in a lot of different ways, which you've got some great questions lined up, and I appreciate that you prepared me. I'm excited to dive in. But that's a high level explanation of what it is. It's basically a collection of experiences and thoughts and the belief that you're not supposed to be doing what you're doing and you're faking it. And when you do succeed, this is the other characteristic, you attribute it to luck or external factors.
Yeah.
So, but then when you fail, you internalize it. So how many of us, I do that too. If I screw something up, it's always my fault. But if
Right.
I tend to like collaborate on celebrating the wins, but it's important to give yourself credit too.
Yeah. And I think I'm super excited to dive into this today because I think it's something that, again, I'd be shocked if not everybody, 100% of people in the world experience it at least in some capacity, but especially in the construction industry, just because it's such a right in the middle of the Venn diagram of you need to have a very, very solid business background and understand how to make money. And you also have to have a very, very solid construction background and understand how to build houses. And a lot of times people will come from one background or the other and feel like they're potentially ill-equipped to handle it holistically. Or it will be a family business that's been passed down that now you're running out of nowhere. I just feel like it's a lot more common in construction because of just how complicated and how many different aspects you have to be a quote unquote expert in, right? And then specifically another area where we wanted to bring you on today is for women in construction. We have a stat in here, only about 11% of the construction workforce is made up from women. Most people in the construction workforce look exactly like me. And that can add on top of it where you don't have kind of these one-to-one peers or people that you can look at of like, why am I the only one doing this thing? So I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about that specifically. Why is imposter syndrome, so prevalent or common in women in construction? And what do you think that is about?
Ooh, let's just jump right in.
Let's jump straight in.
Yeah, let's just go for it. So first of all, I just want to say that none of this is with any judgment to the men, because I think men get a bad rap a lot of times when their behaviors are perceived as, malicious or, mansplaining or, all these things that you guys get sort of held responsible for are not always intentional. So I just want to start with that because I think that there are behaviors that contribute to women feeling imposter syndrome that men might not be aware of. And so I always say, just like start with curiosity and not judgment, right?
Love that phrase. Yeah.
I'll give you an example. A woman that was in my project management masterclass with UConn 2 years ago was also in it with her cousin. It was a family business. She had, I think she was a project manager. I can't remember what her exact title was, but she described, and he confirmed multiple times where a male contractor would come in and ask her a question and she would answer it. And the guy would go to the man and confirm that she gave him the right information. So that's a perfect example of like, I'm sure that contractor didn't come in there like thinking that she didn't belong there or anything malicious, he probably just, whatever, he's got his belief system and whatever he learned from his dad, or, I'm thinking of my husband and how he used to behave, and he was in construction, and And he had a lot of these traits that I didn't like, but that I think he wasn't aware of the impact of them,
Right.
if that makes sense. So back to your question of how women experience it, that's like a micro, it's what you could call like a microaggression, where, because like if that guy asked you that question and you answered it, he'd probably be like, okay, bro, and like,
Right.
and so the fact that he second guessed her and went to a male coworker was kind of an insult, even though he didn't know that was an insult. So for her, her experience in that moment was probably like, I'm sure her inner voice was like, I don't know. I don't know if she reacted with anger or if she was used to it. She said that it happened multiple times. So that's just like a small sort of illustration of it, if that makes sense. And then
Yeah.
I think, yeah, go ahead. I'll let you.
I was just gonna say, absolutely. I think that anytime, again, I'm of the belief that everyone experiences imposter syndrome in some fashion. But anytime you're not only second guessing yourself, but you're now having external people second guess you, it's just going to
Exactly.
compound that belief internally and think, okay, maybe I didn't know the answer, right? And that's completely well, potentially completely unintentional. But there are actions and reactions that a lot of people are unaware of, which is why I think that talking about these sorts of things more and more, why we're so excited to have you on today. I know you're doing webinars about this and classes about this as well too. Again, make the people around you happier and more productive.
Right. And give, I mean, I think women contribute a lot to I think they bring a unique energy. I can see the difference in workshops where I've got a cohort and it's all men.
Mm-hmm.
They're fine. Like we just did one last week. There were no women in the cohort that we just kicked off. But there's a difference in the energy that you get, I think, when you have a woman at the table, and then when you have two or three, it helps. I think it helps shift the culture, potentially, if they're given a voice. If they get talked over at the table, whether that's intentional or unintentional, then everybody's missing out because then they feel shut down, and then they're not going to contribute, and that's where imposter syndrome kicks in.
Right.
So which brings us to the causes. So I don't know if you want to hop to that.
Yeah, that was a fantastic segue. I can tell you've been on the
Yeah.
podcast
So
before.
that's what was super interesting to me also was that it's not just internal. Like I thought that it was just like our inner shit, for lack of a better
Mm-hmm.
term, of, whatever. We've all got our voices and our baggage and our beliefs. But there are, and those are all true. Those are all, the internal causes are very real, but there are also external factors. For example, the one I just explained, the one I just described. So little microaggressions where women, get, or anybody for that matter, gets talked over or interrupted, or is in a culture where it's not rewarded to speak up. So you and I talked about this last
Mm-hmm.
time, actually, we got on this topic of psychological safety and how some workplaces can have a culture where you're encouraged to like put your hand up and say, there's a better way to do this. And then there's workplaces that don't want to hear it. And depending on that culture and how the leadership sets those norms, that can contribute to imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. And I think where I'd like to go with this interview is kind of dive into both sides of that is like, what can an individual do internally if they're experiencing imposter syndrome to push past that, and set themselves up for better, mental sanity and understanding, why I am entitled to do this and why I should do this. And I do rock and I am awesome and everything's going to be okay. But then the other side of that as well, too, is what can other people do to promote that kind of emotional safety in their work environment to ensure that people are struggling with imposter syndrome can, not be productive, but like are able to get out of it. Right. So let's start on the individual basis. Like, what are some common
Yeah.
signs?
What can you do?
Well, yeah, let's start
Yeah.
even further up. Like, how do you understand, like, is this something I'm experiencing?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a really good question. So the self-awareness piece is really key.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this exercise. We'll talk about PEER because that's a really good one. So PEER is just this 4-step acronym that is a reminder when you're feeling something, you're feeling triggered, something's got you. Like that interaction when when that contractor, second guessed the woman and asked the male colleague the same question that he just in front of her. Um, if she was like me, if I were to put myself in her shoes, I would feel an immediate, strong reaction. And the first most important thing to do is to just pause and say, okay, I'm feeling something. And that's to just recognize that you're triggered and ask yourself why. And then the I stands for investigate, which is to figure out what the cause is, what's happening. And then the E is for evaluate. Okay, what can I do about it? What tools do I have? What strategies do I have? And then the R stands for respond. And so it's this 4-step process, and I might have showed it in the emotion regulation podcast too, that you can just use to give yourself that space to come up with a better response to a situation when you're emotionally hijacked in that state of mind. So that's one strategy, but that doesn't really overcome the imposter syndrome. That just stopped you from punching somebody in the throat.
Yeah, a good step one for sure.
There's another strategy called flip the script that I like, and
Okay.
we do this in the master class. And so what you do is it takes a little reflection. You can't just do this on the fly, but you write down whatever the negative messages that you're getting from your inner voice, whether it's saying you should have done this better, you should have done it faster, somebody else could have done it better. And then you ask yourself if it's true. And usually it's not, because our inner voices tend to not be truthful. They're just it's a whole collection of baggage from childhood and other
Yeah.
experiences. And so you write down that negative message, and then you ask yourself, well, what would the opposite be? And the opposite, just the act of rethinking it and flipping it to the opposite can help you reframe and override that negative script.
Interesting. Okay. I think I kind of do that unintentionally sometimes.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of journaling, but I don't do it on a consistent basis. I do it when something's bothering me. And I like write that out because just the process of writing something down, one, makes you pause. If you go back to your peer thing, right? Your brain goes a million miles a minute and you're jumping around to all sorts of different things that could have happened, like the classic shower thoughts, the things that I should have said and could have done here, right?
Yeah.
I find myself spiraling very quickly if I just lay and think about things. But when I write stuff, it forces me to be very intentional about, okay, what is actually bothering me here?
Good.
And why is it bothering me? I don't think I take the next step and like flip the script of like what would the opposite outcome have been. But even just writing something down for me, by the time it's on the page, I read it, I'm like, okay, that is really silly. I can't believe I just wasted 5 minutes writing that down. What was I worried about? As opposed to like if I would be laying in bed, I'd be up until 2 a.m. thinking about it.
Yeah, sometimes we just need to process it, and writing is a really powerful tool. So I'm glad to hear you're journaling. There's some great, so in the show notes, you can share a link.
For sure.
I'll send you a little job aid of some reflection questions that
Oh,
I
okay.
include in the masterclass that are, I think, really helpful. And you can include those in your journaling, or if any of your listeners want to try that, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's it's kind of similar to like tracking your calories is like even just doing it once or twice kind of puts you in a better frame of reference where you don't need to do it every day, but you can at least understand kind of the right steps. You understand exactly, okay, a hamburger is about this many calories, or like this type of problem is about, this level of thinking. So even just doing it a couple times has helped me when I don't do it, be able to at least kind of think through the process in a more intentional way as opposed to spiraling.
Good job, Charlie. You're doing the work.
I try. I needed to.
It's good.
I think
Yeah, we have to process these things.
so I think that's a great strategy. Are there anything else that can really help anybody, experiencing imposter syndrome, but specifically women in construction, push
Ooh,
back self-doubt and own their expertise and their experience?
Yeah. Two quick things come to mind. One is to track your wins. So, and then try something scary, which is like if you're experiencing that you're feeling stuck or that you're feeling like you're, I don't like the word afraid, but you're hesitant to move forward or try something, give yourself a challenge and, like I'm going to speak up in the meeting next week, or I'm going to coach somebody else on how to do something. Like if I see somebody doing something wrong or that could be doing something better, and just give yourself little challenges to because what you're doing, it's not just the fact that you're going to go do the thing and then feel good about it, but you're also training your brain that you're capable of doing these things. And then it helps break down those imposter, messages, basically. Because it does get better over time. And it's like with intention, you're building a muscle and eventually you can learn to like override all that. And this isn't to say that you can go do heart surgery just because you watched Grey's Anatomy and you've decided that you're not an imposter. Like you have to own your successes, but a lot of us tend to, even though we've got the track record and the proven certifications and everything, we tend to not give ourselves credit for really bringing value to the table often. And that's the sad thing, because it's like everybody loses out. And then the other thing I was going to say is women can form alliances. So get to know other people in the workplace, and it helps sometimes. And men too, try to hold space and see if you see somebody acting in a way that is probably insulting and maybe they're not aware of it, approach them about it. You don't have to call them out and make them feel bad, but just help be the change.
Yeah, I love both those things. The challenge one specifically, I'm a big fan of. I did that early in my career. This is my first job out of college. I'm like, I don't, deserve to be sitting in this room. And I'd sit there and take notes. And that was something I had to do. Was like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to say one thing. And like your whole time, you're just like, as long as I can speak up in this meeting, doesn't matter if I'm just agreeing with someone, like just push past that, because then the challenges become confidences. You're like, okay, I can do this. Yeah. And then to your point, remember those things, write those things down. That's a win that you can always like go and fall back on then when you're experiencing the other side of things. Like, okay, I've done hard things before. And I was scared
but we
before.
tend to forget it. We remember the bad stuff. We remember the unpleasant more easily.
Yeah.
So
I can think of countless times where I'm like, okay, this is going to be really, really hard. I'm like, wait, I've done really, really hard things before and everything turned out great.
That's all it is. You're just questioning those beliefs that are so automatic that we never think to override them. Yeah. But once we do.
And then the like peer-to-peer group, or like the networking, is another fantastic one that I actually think the construction industry as a whole is getting a lot better at over the past 4 to 5 years, where it used to be kind of, I have my trade secrets and I don't want to share my financials and I don't want to share my subcontractors and all the problems I'm experiencing. I'm the only person experiencing them. That's why I love doing this podcast, is I get to talk to people. I'm like, wait, I'm not the only person that has this problem. A lot of other people do too. So if something that, in this specific example of like being a woman in the construction workplace, I'm sure it can feel incredibly lonely, and that you are the only one experiencing the things that you're experiencing. And that just continues to compound. But finding a group of people and understanding, okay, other people have dealt with these same sort of things before, and this is what they do to manage it, and I'm not the only one, can get you out of that rut for sure.
And also, I think, assume the best, unless people are acting like purposely awful. I always say assume the best intent in people, and just speak up and hold your space. And there's some assertiveness techniques too that I know we're getting over time. But one thought or question or prompt, if you're journaling, is like, what prevents you from being assertive? If that's something that you're not comfortable with, because a lot of people aren't. Think about what the barriers are. Is it because I don't want to hurt people's feelings? Is it because I assume somebody's going to not like me? Once you say it out loud and think about it, it's not always, it's often our own messages again that keep us from doing it, what it is we want to do.
Is there a now I'm just like using this as a therapy session. I'm going to tell you stuff I struggle with and hope that it's applicable to everyone else. Is this something that you work with people on, is like you want them to be confident and assertive and humble, but you don't want to feel like you're constantly having to prove yourself.
Yeah.
What's the balance there that you typically kind of recommend of
Yeah, that's a good
not
question.
that, not, it's not like I've made it now, but it's
Like
you're always
humility
trying to prove yourself.
and
Yeah.
confidence. Well, confidence comes from the achievements that you know you've done. So if your confidence is not, if it doesn't have a solid foundation, if it's just based on external factors, that's where you get into shaky ground. If your confidence is based on other people's praise and external things, then it's much less effective. So your confidence has to come from your own belief in your worth.
Love
It's
that.
definitely something I learned from building this class too. I was like, oh wow, yeah. Because it's so easy to get wrapped up in the likes or the subscribers
Right.
or the kudos or whatever, and that's all just external things that we don't really have any control over. So you don't want to give that power up, basically.
Yeah. Control what you can control. Like you said, we are getting close to time here, but I think a good kind of question to end on here would be kind of twofold. Is like, one, how can women in leadership positions help support and mentor and experience or help, coach and experience people experiencing imposter syndrome, maybe things that they've already gone through. And then two, what role do kind of like male allies play in fostering a more inclusive and supportive industry and construction in this case?
Yeah, those are great questions. Well, I think in both cases, whether you're male or female, if you're a leader, just checking in and seeing how people are doing and also sharing your experiences and sharing some vulnerability is always a good step for building trust, which builds confidence in others. If a leader sees that somebody's, struggling to speak up at meetings, or I was coaching this one woman and she really had trouble speaking up in meetings where this one other person was present. And so it's like, oh, okay, well, what's that about? So dig in and ask those questions and do it without judgment, do it with curiosity. And I think for the second question, for how men, how male coworkers can be allies, just ask yourself if you're behaving in a way that you want people to. I had this great client who really broke down one time with me and shared that he had a close friend that passed away. And at this guy's funeral, people were talking about what a great guy he was. And my client was like in tears, basically saying, I don't want people to remember the things about me that I'm doing right now, basically. Because he did have a way of like making people cry on his team and not, it wasn't in construction, it was in mortgage, but still, the way that you give feedback to people and the way that you show up in meetings and the way that you correct people on their behavior, like it has this ripple effect. And so keeping that in mind, I don't care what gender you are or what gender you're dealing with, I think that that's just part of being a good human.
Yeah, that's a really interesting and really introspective way of thinking about things. Is you're building your legacy every single day and every action that you do. So what's the legacy you want to leave behind?
How do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered as the guy that made everybody cry?
Yeah, Probably not. That's a fantastic point to end on, Estie. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
I always find this incredibly beneficial. I know our listeners do too. So really appreciate you making the time.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks for having me. Thanks for asking good questions and holding space.
Absolutely. We'll see you soon.
Okay.
All right. We just heard from Estie Briggs, emotional intelligence coach and consultant at Briggs Performance Consulting. And she did not disappoint. I know the angle specifically of this interview was really geared towards women in construction, but I personally found it very, very, very informative for myself as well too. I think a lot of the strategies that she outlined around, writing stuff down, pausing and reflecting, the PEER acronym that she gave was very beneficial and something that I'm definitely going to start taking advantage of in the workplace. And I also think just being really intentional and insightful around who you want to be and the legacy you want to leave. The note that she ended on I thought was very powerful, because we're making our legacies every single day with every action that you do. So just be a good human. Treat other people how you want to be treated. Reach out. I think that's something I personally can do a lot better job of, is most people are pretty good at understanding and recognizing when someone's struggling. So go to them and ask them what they need help with, what you can do to better help them. Be a mentor, be a leader, and just trust yourself. I think that if you're running a construction business, that you are a very, very, very successful person already. So feel that confidence, and pour from that bucket to those people around you as well. So I have a page full of notes. I'm going to get a lot better at this. I learned a lot, and hopefully you as a listener did as well too. And we will be back again next week at the Building Code. As always, I'm Charley Birtwistle. Peace.